Hello, this is Kirsten Eschberger, and I'm a listener from Seattle, Washington. I'm a senior project manager at This Place. We help global brands build products and services for the digital economy. Welcome to this video episode of the People and Projects podcast.
Hi, this is Andy Kaufman. Thank you for joining me for this video episode of the People and Projects podcast. I don't know what your week was like, but I got to tell you, I had a great week. I was with a lot of different organizations. But you know, one of the things that made this week really cool was long ago, one of my first jobs, there was somebody I was working with, and she was on the marketing side, I was on the systems side, and I don't remember what I did, but somehow I did something that kind of ticked her off, and she let me know about it in her office, and it didn't feel so good, but when she was done with it, she goes, "You know what I just did here? I learned from a book called The 1 Minute Manager," and so check it out, The 1 Minute Manager. This is like the first edition from 1982 right here, and in the book they call it the 1 minute reprimand. All right. So she ripped into me, the 1 minute reprimand. And so I wasn't all that fond of the book at first, but there were a number of things, not only in that one, but follow-up 1 minute managers that really made a big difference for me. Like early on in my career, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits and the 1 minute managers, these made a real big difference early in my management career. Well, anyway, Ken Blanchard has a new book that's just coming out. And I got contacted by them of like, would you want to put them on the podcast? And so on Monday this week, I got to talk with Ken Blanchard. All right. So I'm not usually a groupie, but this guy's like one of my heroes. So he's got this book coming out, 1 minute mentoring. And so you'll get that podcast episode soon. So that made it a great week. Now there are a number of different things, but here's for this episode, what I want to cover is this week I had a couple keynotes that were on the subject of decision making. And though we've had some coverage of that in the past, there are a couple things that I just feel like I relearned this week as I worked with people on the topic. And so when it comes to, making better decisions or decisions that, don't turn out well, a lot of times what people say is, well, you know why that decision didn't turn out well? Because that person was overconfident. It didn't turn out well because they were overconfident. Okay. So I think that's interesting because overconfidence, as it turns out, is something that we ascribe or attribute to a decision when it turned out to be bad. But if it turned out to be good, well, that was bold leadership. Isn't that funny? That it's something that we say. It's like assumptions on projects. Like people go, hey, don't assume, because you know what the word assume means, right? But that's because it turned out to be a bad assumption. If it turned out to be a good assumption, that was just great planning. And so I know that overconfidence certainly can hurt, but it's not quite that simple. In fact, one of the big lessons in my sessions this week on decision making was widen your options. A lot of times we don't make good decisions because we just didn't evaluate enough options. And so there are many different ways to do it. But one of the things that we ask people to look for, and this comes from the Heath brothers in their book Decisive, they say, listen for when you say, I'm trying to decide whether or not. That's the phrase to look for. If you could watch for a trigger, it'd be whether or not. I'm trying to decide whether or not to do this. I'm trying to decide whether or not to do that. That's a trigger for we're not considering enough options. There's almost always more options than what we're thinking. And so try to force yourself to look for options. In addition, we talked about things like, well, when you're trying to come up with options or you're just not sure what to do, how about you ask a question like, what would I advise a friend to do here? Sometimes we're so close to it that maybe there's just a strong status quo pull to us that's keeping us from making a change, or maybe it's just the risks that are involved. My wife tells me often, she goes, I can go help my friend go through her closet and decide what to get rid of. I can help her do that. But when it comes to my own closet, it's a lot more difficult. And can you relate to that? That when it comes to somebody who has to make a decision, sometimes it's like, why are you struggling over this? I mean, this is what you ought to do. But when we are going through that same thing, it's more difficult. There's a story told in the early days of Intel They were in the memory business, right? I think of, and you probably think as well, of Intel being in the microprocessor business, but they were in the memories. And just think about memory business now. I mean, like right by me, like I'm recording this onto an SD card that contains about what used to take rooms to store, and the price is so low. And so Andy Grove and Gordon Moore, they're trying to think, do we stay in memories, even though the margins are getting smaller and there's more, it's a more crowded space, or do we get out of it? But to get out of a space where you're doing well in, it's difficult. And sometimes we're faced with these decisions like, I don't know, what do we do here? They were just really close to it. So instead of like, how would you advise a friend? They did a variation of this. And they said, hey, you know what? Let's say that we got kicked out. The board kicked us out and they replaced us with new leaders. What would they do? You know what they said? We'd get out of memories. They would get out of memories. And so their point is, if that's what they would do, that should be a sign that we should get out of memories. Now, just to show you how kind of like weird I am, I think of that sometimes even in my marriage. Like if I died and my wife remarried, like what would that loser do that I'm not doing now? I'm going to start doing that now. It's this whole idea of when we're making these decisions, sometimes what happens, we're just too close to it. So whether it's how would you advise a friend, if we were replaced and someone else had to make this call, what would they do? I think that's a helpful way to think about decisions. And one last thought when it comes to decisions, that one of the steps in the Decisive book is prepare to be wrong. Like a lot of times we don't prepare to be wrong. We're just like, we're going to make this decision and make it work. And sometimes that's what we need to do. We need to just make this thing work. Okay. That's what I love about stories about arranged marriages. Like as my kids get older, I'm believing in arranged marriages more and more. and a lot of times it's, we decide to love each other and that decision, they make it work. Right. So I get that with arranged marriages. But sometimes when it comes to decisions that we make, we actually will work at making it work. But then it becomes this fine line between, is it persistence or is it denial of reality? I mean, think about that. How can you tell the difference between persistence of, we got to make this decision work, whether it's a software implementation, whether it's a vendor decision, regardless, a project decision? When is it persistence? And when is it denial of reality? I think it's really hard to tell, especially in the moment. Certainly, time will tell. But one of the steps in the Heath Brothers book, Decisive, is you set a tripwire. So here's the deal. We're going to make a decision, and we're going to let it run for a while. A tripwire is a little bit like if you invest in a stock, you put a stop loss order in as well. So if it happens to go this low, or for that matter, if it goes this high, but it tries to take some of the emotion out of it. And same thing with the tripwire. It's like, you know what? All right, we're going to make this decision based on certain assumptions and things like that. But here's the deal. If we don't start reaping certain benefits by this point out here, we're going to hit that tripwire, it's stop loss, and we're going to have to reevaluate. Okay? So I don't know what kind of decisions you've got coming up in the next week, in the coming weeks ahead, but you know what? We're faced with them all the time. How about this, just from today's discussion? Widen your options. Come up with some more options. Maybe you think about, well, what would I advise a friend to do? Or if someone else was in my position, and they weren't quite as kind of wedded to the situation, there wasn't as much emotion tied into it, what do you think they would decide? And then consider that idea of the tripwire. Make a decision, but also realize that this may not be a good decision. And how about, where's a point out there that we can cut our losses? One of the things I love about that is it can calm me down until we get there. And I can do everything I can to make it successful. But we also can limit our losses. Well, hey, there's some things that I learned or relearned this week, and I hope you have a great week ahead. Thank you for being a listener of the People and Projects podcast, and thank you for joining me for this video episode. Have a great week.
Thank you for watching this video episode of the People and Projects podcast. Have a great week. Hello, this is Kirsten Eschberger, a senior project manager. Welcome to this